We're back. Our final segment for this week's show is, of course, our interview with the esteemed Violet Gray. I was asking before how we wanted to start, whether it be comedy, whether it be the nerd stuff, whether it be the attack of the alt-right, and Violet said it didn't matter. So I guess, why was the alt-right attacking you? Let's start with there.
Okay, so a couple years ago, I watched this mini documentary on YouTube that addressed why the poorest people in the Midwest, I think West Virginia maybe, in the Midwest, why they voted for Trump. And the idea that was put forth by this documentary was that there was an oil industry there that allowed you to make $60,000 straight out of high school. It was just assumed that when you got out of school, you would get a job in the oil industry. That oil industry went away. The people there weren't used to training in other skills that much, and so the area became destitute. And when Trump swooped in, he came in with this lie that he would restore their oil jobs.
Oh yeah.
So that was their explanation. The reason this matters is because I then made a Facebook post where I pointed out that poor Black people in Detroit also had an industry leave. But rather than why are we, one thing that we're not hearing about the white people in West Virginia is they need to get off welfare. They need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They need to do for themselves. We're not hearing the quote unquote personal responsibility. We're hearing these people were left behind. This is why people voted for Trump, because these people are desperate. These people need help. And I said that I felt like because the color and the demographic were different, the conversation is different. So the first time I got a swastika posted on my Facebook feed, a bunch of my friends jumped all over that person. And then I started getting dozens and dozens of more swastikas and Pepe the Frog memes and like memes about Black IQ statistics. And a friend of mine who is a computer science guy and an accomplished nerd, he let me know that there was an alt-right radio station that, so this post of mine got shared a bunch of times. And he said there was this alt-right radio station that had been shown my post about Detroit and West Virginia. And he put it up on his website and was basically like, get her.
That was like the source.
Yes.
Keep talking. I'm listening. I gotta feed this fucking cat. Go ahead.
Sure. But you know how there was so much debate about whether the OK symbol was racist? When this happened, people who were a fan of this alt-right radio station, they like parked their car to take a cell phone picture of the OK symbol to post on my feed. And so when people were like, is the OK symbol racist? I was like, well, the racists think it's racist. And I would argue that the OK symbol was actually chosen for its ambiguity. But yeah, and so I got challenged to a debate by the alt-right guy. And I was going to do it because I was like, it seems to me that a lot of people that showed up have never even heard the opposing arguments. But I let my friends talk me out of it because they were like, these are probably 4chan types and they'll probably do some serious hacking on you. And, and I was
They
like,
did.
bye.
I did it. I did not keep going. I just want to quickly say I participated in one of those debates and I won.
Oh
And
gosh, I would love to see
I
that.
was
Oh my
declared
gosh.
the winner by like the racist moderator because the guy who they chose to go against me, he conceded too much,
Uh-huh.
right? And like they didn't like the concessions that he made. And then they started asking me questions. And I'm like, you guys don't know any Black people, like any of our side, do
Right.
you? And they're like, no. And it ended up being like 3 hours, like an Oxford style debate, whether race in the 21st century, what was it to mean or whatever. And they came, what triggered this was you said they came with the IQ stats and like the bootstrap talk and
Right.
how Trump was their last chance for against Hillary Clinton or whatever. They didn't like Trump because he was a Jew sympathizer, but like he was gonna be better than Hillary. Yeah, like that kind of
Dang,
stuff.
Trump wasn't racist enough for them.
Trump wasn't racist enough. He was just a better. These were those kinds of racists.
Would they like they would need to vote for like an actual burning cross?
Yeah.
That's like pretty much.
But that's
what it
only
was.
vice president, though.
Yeah,
Right.
they didn't like how Trump allowed his daughter to marry a Jew, but he was like going to be infinitely better than Hillary Clinton. But go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, to his credit for them, Jared Kushner is a Baltimore slumlord. So
He is. He is.
actually, there's a whole Netflix episode of the documentary Dirty Money that focuses on Jared Kushner's dealings.
His whole crooked ass family.
Yep.
And he's
but yeah, so that is how that happened. And occasionally I do like get the odd angry person on my YouTube channel, but it's petered off since then.
Yeah. I know she actually used to be a regular on our show, Bunny Themelis.
Yes,
she had one of the same kinds of attack, right, from the alt-right. I think it was from hers were from, not that they aren't concentric circles, but hers were more from the incel crowd, because I think she said something like men are trash or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like she got bombarded. Like just like literally like bombarded with stuff.
Yeah, there's a cadre of people on the internet that literally have nothing better to do.
Yeah.
Like they don't have a PS5. Like, I mean, they probably, I mean, they certainly don't have attention from women. So
no.
And of course that's everybody else's fault. But yeah.
We don't know how to be the right women, so that's our fault. We're not doing it the right way.
Oh, yeah. That's of course.
8 out of 10. You don't have a job. You don't make $100,000.
Y'all better call Kevin Samuels.
Right.
Yeah, we're not going to coach, so we haven't learned from our feedback.
Right.
I resent that. You can't put me in the same conversation as Kevin Samuels. I'm not.
My apologies.
But yeah, and I'm not surprised that your debate went that way, Crazy, because as you can probably tell, I have a lot of debate on mine. And
I love your page, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for that because I get to hear different perspectives. Mm-hmm. Like you and I were going back and forth on Biden versus Sanders and stuff, and that sort of thing is valuable. And I think what happened in your case is that they had this insular bubble where they don't get that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my story of getting targeted by the alt-right.
How did you combine? Well, first of all, how did you get into stand-up before I go deeper into it?
Okay, so the first time I got the hint was when my first year in Towson, I went to school for molecular biology. Mm-hmm. And everyone I met asked me which theater program I was in.
Wow.
And so I was like, maybe I should give this a try. So I went to Courtney's place, which isn't around anymore, which is a quote unquote urban room.
Mhm.
I went there with my nerd jokes. They did not laugh. It was very quiet. Like, but I kept going back, which is the biggest difference between a stand-up comic and an audience member is a stand-up comic is an audience member that just kept trying. That's really the only difference. And I learned later that that club had a reputation as being like the roughest club in Baltimore,
Mhm.
but it was my first place, so I didn't know that. And so in retrospect, it kind of felt like Dragon Ball Z training in 400% gravity.
Mhm. Yeah.
Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, and this is back when I had to look up where a stand-up comedy night was in the paper.
Yeah.
Like for a lot of your listeners, back in the day, we used to read the news on papers, like physical, and like you couldn't scroll or zoom or anything. It just stayed there. And but yeah, that's how I got into stand-up. Is a lot of trial and error. When I came out as Violet, that was an adventure.
Mhm.
Coming out to the comedy community
Yeah.
as a gender non-conforming person, that had some stories that came with
Yeah.
that too.
Like, so I've seen your stand up thrice. You are close. You're actually, I've actually, so me, and Sean, we're in the same class at Gilman with Brian Preston. So,
Oh yeah. Okay.
yeah. So I saw Brian perform. When I was seeing Brian perform, that's when I saw you,
Mhm.
right? And then it's interesting. So I saw your performance and I was like, okay, like, this is, when you first go out there, like, I was like, okay, it's a pretty nice looking lady. I'm a fan. Like, it's funny too. I'm like, okay. And then your act, you talked about, being trans. You talked about you had a joke. Damn it. I remember the joke. Fuck, I was remembering the joke and then I just forgot it.
I probably know what it is. It's okay.
But it was like, it wasn't your act. It wasn't about your transition. It was more about like what other people thought about your transition and like how you
Yes.
thought that was funny. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it was
Yeah.
fucking hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of when you first incorporated in your act, like what kinds of reactions did you get? Not only from your fellow comedians, but from like audiences.
Okay, so the very first time I performed as Violet, the comedian after me, the next comedian called me the F word when he got up on stage. And he got booed off. They didn't appreciate that. The next time I did stand up, I found out that one of the comics took stealth pictures of me on his phone and then went around to different comedy clubs showing them my picture. Like, can you believe this person is dressed like this? The audiences, I think when it comes to what people are comfortable with, I think that humor can be the sugar coating to an otherwise bitter pill. And so, like, even if people, if it would ordinarily make them uncomfortable, I think that coming at them with jokes can sometimes disarm them.
Yeah.
I had to learn some lessons. There were some things when they talk about things like male privilege. There are some lessons that I had to learn. Like when I started performing as Violet was the first time a guy followed me home and tried to push his way into my door.
Wow.
And that was something that honestly I had never had to think about before. I find that typically I do better with women in the audience than men. Not by much, especially if the crowd is more progressive, then it's about even. I was surprised one time I did this like biker gang. There was this biker dude who really liked my comedy, and he had me do comedy in his favorite strip club. And
What?
yes.
How does it even work?
So it's like, yeah, it's like, hey, you're fucking funny. Like, I go to this strip club all the time. Like, will you ever thought about performing there?
And let me tell you, those splits are hard to do, but but no, like they took a break from, like, I'm doing stand-up, there's like a pole behind me. but it ended up being a good time. That's I guess that's what I'm getting at. People can surprise you. Like, there are people who I would think would beat my ass out in the street who were actually pretty cool and open-minded. And I'm not one for optimism, but that gives me hope.
Well, it's a tough thing. You know, you look at Ron DeSantis in Florida and his new laws that he has against transgender athletes. Now, I have my own thoughts on that issue. And why not? I'm gonna dive in. I'm probably gonna get ridiculed later on, but you know, I'm a personal trainer, right? And the big thing right now is Ron DeSantis has determined that trans students cannot compete against someone that is not their natural born sex, right? So if they're born
right.
against men. I think that at a high school level, especially where there has been no hormone therapy, I think it's unfair. I think it's unfair because men have just the physiological parts of men when it comes to certain physical aspects sports. It's just an unfair advantage, and I don't think that should be permitted. Now later on in NCAA, they have rules for trans athletes, right? But my question is one, in high school, should it be okay for anatomical boys to compete against anatomical girls, regardless of what they identify as? And two, is it fair that a trans athlete in college, a woman that transfers to men, has to take testosterone therapy in order to become a man, right? Is it fair for her to compete as a man because she's taking testosterone? Is that same substance for men to take in the NCAA?
Right. So I have a couple opinions about this. One thing that comes to mind is there is this trans high schooler who was born female, but transitioned to male, who is the women's high school champion because they force her, now him, to wrestle the women. And he's like, I don't want to do that. I'm taking testosterone. Can I please wrestle the men? And they're like, no, you have to wrestle the women. And so he's taking championship after championship when all he wants to do is be fair. And I do feel like it is part. So for example, when Ronald Reagan talked about welfare mothers, the point of him talking about welfare mothers wasn't really that it was a problem, but that it was something that could generate concern that they could be voted about. And I feel like for the whole trans, it's such a specific thing
Mhm.
I feel like this has sort of the same motivation. Now, even when you're talking about kids, well, for one thing, like I think that a kid's transition is between them, their parents, and their doctor. And if it's all three of those are in a line, kids are starting to transition younger.
Mhm.
And I think before puberty, it doesn't really
Right.
matter that much. And I think after puberty, I think kids are starting to transition younger, and I think that's okay. I don't know if I would say that a purely cis XY chromosome person should compete against a purely cis XX chromosome person.
Mhm.
I mean, it almost never happens, but also it depends on the sport because
Track
I
and field, is
think,
the big one, right?
say it again?
Track and field is like the biggest one.
Right. It depends on the sport and it depends on the advantage. I will say that with a trans man competing with other men, there is the thing that if they didn't transition before puberty, then they are going to start with some disadvantages, and the same vice versa. So I do think that one difference between a trans male athlete and other men athlete is that a trans male athlete is making up a deficit of testosterone,
Mhm.
whereas a cis male athlete can produce testosterone naturally. You don't really see a lot of trans male athletes like dominating men's sports. I
Right.
think you're muted, Quasi.
That's where I am, Violet. I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm like, is this really a problem?
It's not. I agree. See, that's the point that I agree with. I agree that it's not an issue.
Getting to your Ronald Reagan point, like this just
It's
seems
attention.
like an othering, right? It's like, hey, like, look at them. We're against them, and we're gonna show you how much we're against them.
Oh, and by the
Where
way,
are all the trans champions?
we only hear about the trans athletes that do well. There are
Yeah,
plenty of trans
yeah,
athletes that suck.
exactly.
So then I read about a young girl who is 17 years old and is on the way to her Division I college scholarship for track and field, and she
Mhm.
consistently won first, and then there's a trans athlete, and he smokes her.
Mhm.
Goes from being first to being second, and loses her scholarship because she didn't place in the XYZ meets.
Right.
Is that fair?
It is a difficult thing to navigate. And we're just now beginning to have a conversation about how it's one thing about being trans, it's one of the few demographics that can change so dramatically.
Mhm.
I mean, depending on where you are in your transition, it can mean different things psychologically, biologically, socially.
Mhm.
And so it's sort of difficult to navigate. And I guess the best solution that I can come up with is to deal with each situation individually.
Interesting.
There are probably so few you can deal with them individually.
That's where I am, Sean. Like, is this a problem?
I agree with you. I don't disagree that is a small issue, right? It's just that to me it's a wedge issue for a lot of other Americans, right?
Mhm.
So we try to find the commonality that yes, we're all human beings, and then the what if, well, you're this, you're that, all those things all come into play. And just being an athlete and coaching people is just an
Mhm.
interesting subject matter.
Yeah, like I can understand like it hitting close to home because the physical realm is
Right.
where you are, your livelihood. It's something that is important to you. But like a part of me is like, yeah, can I go to the bathroom? Like
Right.
A bigger part
Right.
for me in the work that I do is, can you stop killing?
Right,
Yeah.
right, absolutely.
Can we support our children so that they're not kicked out of their homes and are homeless and are,
Right.
survival sex for 48 hours? Because that
Yeah,
seems to be
yeah,
much more the
in a
field I'm
fit
working.
of masochism,
Yeah.
I went through the comments page of Gabrielle Union's posting
Yeah.
with her trans daughter
Mhm.
Zendaya,
Yeah.
and the things that were being said there were indicative of how much work needs to be done, because these people
Yeah.
then leave the comment section and go out into the
The
world.
world, yeah, with these thoughts, and it's like, man.
And they're like one person was like, all three of them are going to hell. And I'm like, so you mean to tell me they're going to get to the pearly gates and God is going to be like, well, you were good to all the people that you know, you were loyal to your friends, you were helpful to the needy, but you wore a dress and acrylic nails. So into the flames you go.
Well, the acrylic nails are the challenge.
Say that again? Yeah.
It's like the acrylic nails.
Yeah.
That's the deal breaker.
That's true. But yeah, to circle back to your question, yeah, it's been an interesting experience in comedy and in real life and day job. But yeah, it's been a ride. I do consider myself more fortunate than most,
Mhm.
because the stereotype of the trans prostitute comes from the fact that a lot of trans people don't have a support structure and people won't hire them.
Mhm.
And I do feel like I'm a lot more fortunate than most people in that respect. Many people that I've known in that respect.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's been a ride. One that I'm still on, by the way. I still feel like there's much left to complete.
Sure. When you think about Pride Month, like, what does that mean to you? What does that think? Because so somebody's like, yeah, like, what does Black History Month mean to you? I'm like,
Mhm.
we aren't, we try not, as a country, as a nation, we try not to be too overtly white for 4 weeks or whatever. Try to focus
Right.
on other things. And I'm not shitting on Black History Month, but I'm Black. I try to focus on these things 365 days a year, not just
Mhm.
one month.
Right.
Does Pride Month, does it have that kind of artificial feel to you? Or because it's so new and kind of sort of really like picking up steam, like
Mhm.
have that kind of sort of, no, this actually has, real value, real meaning? Again, not to say that Black History Month doesn't, but I'm like,
Well, I'll draw a parallel. So I think in some respect, both can be true, because on the one hand, Pride has definitely been commercialized.
Yeah.
Like if you actually go to Pride, there are so many like Lockheed Martin, like bank floats and stuff like that. And there was, and like Crayola and McDonald's are wishing you a happy Pride, and it's purely capital, like kind of like how McDonald's wanted to appeal to Black people, so they changed it to "I'm loving it."
yeah.
Yeah, so there is a sort of commercialized exterior to Pride, but at its core, it's about, well, like one thing that is different from Pride for Black History Month is that very few young Black kids have families telling them not to be Black.
Yeah.
And Pride, so people, you know how people were in the news, like I'm trying to start a straight Pride sort of thing.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and
those are the concentric circle people with the racists. Yeah, it's like the same.
So, so a quick story explaining how I feel about Pride. When I was 7 years old, I used to go to like this after school daycare center, and they had this area where you could play house, and they had like all these adult clothes, and they had like a little plastic stove. And I avoided going there because I was like, if I go over there, I'm going to put on that dress. Like that is a thing I'm going to do. So I'm not going to go over there. But one day I was just like, you know what? Screw it. I can't not do this. So I went over there and I put on the dress. And one of the teachers saw me and she was like, come here. And I was like, oh crap, I know I'm in trouble. So I go to take the dress off and she's like, no, leave it on. And then she gets this chair and she sits me in front of the daycare and she says, sit in this chair and don't leave. And the reason she said that was so that all of the kids and their parents coming to get the kids could stare at me on their way out.
Wow.
That was the point. And then afterwards she was like, I want you to understand that I did that because what you're doing is not okay. And things like that, people who have to go through things like that are sort of why Pride exists. And the difference, that's why the straight Pride doesn't make sense, because when people talk about LGBT Pride, it's restorative as opposed to an add-on. It's to compensate for a society that tells you that you're not supposed to be who you are. And so I think that is what Pride means to a lot of people. And of course, there's huge debate about Pride. Like one huge debate that happened this year that's still happening. I mean, it's bigger than the Ellie Kemper thing, is whether kink and BDSM should be allowed in Pride. That's a huge debate. Because people are like, because there are some people who are like, Pride is full of people who were sexually repressed and could use the opportunity to show out a little bit. But other people are like, there are lots of LGBT kids and I want to take them to an event that is welcoming to them. And I don't want them to see somebody in assless chaps or whatever.
Right.
So how Pride is expressed is a conversation that's going on, but I think at its core, it was a riot. Like Pride started over something that the sort of thing that conservatives blame Antifa on now. But yeah, that is what Pride means to me. Even if it has its flaws, at its core, it's meant to be restorative.
Okay.
Is there
I'm
anything?
great. I was gonna just, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I think I would just say thank you for just sharing the story of you in school. I think that's important. I think it's important for us to have these conversations, because I think that there's this, and I can't speak at all to this experience. So I would say more in allyship and working on the periphery of this. But I think it's also about the importance of saying this is not a choice, right? This is not a choice. And so I lost my train of thought because this is way past my bedtime, but I'm just trying to say, I think that we need to have these conversations, and we need to have these conversations in our community because we're not having enough of that. And we're seeing, like, for me, I'm seeing our kids, and there's substance abuse, there's mental health challenges, there's homelessness. All of the decisions that are made are based on a lack of support, a lack of acceptance, and we're stuck in minutia to me. And it's not to minimize the questions, but to me, hearing this, it's like, I don't care about what you're doing athletically. I care about the fact that kids are committing suicide, and what, so I guess my question is, what can we do to support the community, the trans community, the LGBTQIA plus community besides Pride, right? Because it's the same thing that we talked about for Black History Month. After this month ends and everyone feels great because they put up their flags and whatever, what can we really do? And I don't mean to put that all on you, that you're speaking for the entire community, but I think it's helpful. What are some things that we can actionable steps that we can do?
Well, one thing that I like to try to do is, because I'm a huge fan. Do you know, what is the name of that guy? Do you remember that guy he's a Black dude who made friends with several members of the Ku Klux Klan and
Yes.
got them to leave the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Right. Now, the reason I think that works is because it's easy to hate a concept.
Right.
And it's harder to hate a human. So one thing that I like to focus on is humanization. And when people say, oh, it's part of the LGBT agenda, in some sense, I hope they're correct, because part of that agenda would be to humanize and to normalize people. And I think that in a very general sense, like personally, I try to do it through my entertainment. I try to say, hey, I'm a person. I have the same fears and insecurities as you do. We're not really that different, other than the fact that I look like a necromancer. But yeah, I think that in a very general sense, like there are smarter people than me who can talk about policy. But as someone who entertains for a living, I recognize the value of humanization and doing what we can to humanize people. And I think that comes down to representation, and not just in entertainment, in politics, in media. Like, I saw a documentary about the history of trans people on film. And one thing they pointed out, that one reason that Pose was so popular and it came across as so authentic is because the sort of people in front of the camera were also behind the camera. And I think things like that are really important.
It's 12:17. Is there, well, first, Walter, Nicole, Sean, do you guys have any other questions or any inquiries?
Nope.
Because if not, I would ask Violet, is there, even though you said a lot, and that's Nicole's question kind of sort of wrap things up nicely. I still ask it, is there anything that you want to leave us with? Although I'm sure it's humanization, right? People are people, right?
Yes. People are people. You'll find that if you open your mind, that people are not really that different from each other. Like if you go into a dark room in nothing but your socks, you've hit your shin on the bedpost and it hurt. That has happened to all people
of
all demographics.
What plug some stuff?
Let's see. My YouTube channel is Violet Gray. I'm Violet Silver on Twitter, and Chaotic Violet on Instagram, and Violet Gray on Facebook.
Okay, we'll make sure to include all of that on the write-up. I'm done as a teacher. Like, I'm done with like schools out for the summer or whatever. So I'll be much better and faster editing this stuff. So you'll see it out soon, and we'll include your Facebook, Instagram, Twitter in the write-up as well. I cannot thank you enough. This went exactly as I thought it would. I knew it'd be good. Just in a conversation, and I'm excited to look at this, edit this, and get this out for people, because people need to hear this. Particularly your personal interview, but really all the conversation that we had was, I think, meaningful, and it's actually why I do this. So, with that being said, this was the end of the Brothers and Sisters podcast for June 3rd, 2021. It's now June 4th, 2021. We went in midnight. Next week, look out for we're either gonna have, in continuing our Pride theme, we're gonna either have Dominic Joseph Whitty, business owner, or Ranty Nathan Oleasi, political activist. And I'm actually trying to get a friend of a friend who is, wait for it, a Black gay Republican.
How does that work?
Yeah, yeah. That's what those are the cool. We'll have an opportunity to
We'll
post
have to tune in.
also when he comes on. There we go. There he comes on. That's actually what we should lead with. Like, how does this song work exactly? Like, but Violet, thank you so much. I'm gonna stop recording.